Hello, everyone. Welcome back to episode two. My name is Aryan, and his name is Sanav. And on this podcast, we'd like to talk about psychological and physiological things, and delve deeper and kind of explain it through our own personal experiences. And today is a very special episode because we're going to be talking about something that's present in every living person and has dated back since the dawn of humanity.
Hmm.
And it's something known as fight or flight. And it's something that's very survival based. We're going to talk about more topics on that, but we're going to start with fight or flight. And to sum it up or to give a definition, a basic one before we delve deeper, it's a response, it's an automatic response that's triggered by an event as that's perceived as either stressful or frightening. And so now, would you like to explain a bit further?
Yeah, as Aryan said, right, it's about a matter of survival and how the human body is literally designed for survival. And it's seen, as Aryan said, from the dawn of time, but its applications and I guess the responses, the physiological responses are still seen in our behavior today. And the first one, as Aryan spoke about, is the fight or flight response, right? Which obviously occurs uh, as a response when we're in a dangerous situation, which is life threatening, or at least was life threatening, uh, like millions and millions of years ago, right? So thousands of years ago, sorry. And yeah, so when our ancestors faced the threat of, like, say, fighting an animal for their survival, right? They would judge their own capabilities based on which they would decide either to continue fighting for their survival, obviously with their judgment being that they have a chance of, like, a good probability or good possibility of uh, defeating the animal in combat or in any fight, right? And essentially getting food for the day versus facing, say, a bigger threat like maybe uh, many elephants charging at them, right? They would obviously choose not to fight because they believe that they're not physically capable to take on a herd of elephants, right? And instead,
Right.
they would choose to flee the situation. And that's, I think, what flight implies, right? So,
I mean,
Aryan, you could elaborate.
yeah, and so Sunav brought up a beautiful point how like fight or flight, when it was applied in the past, it was life threatening, and the whole point of flight or fight was a survival instinct that was triggered when your life was in question and was or it was a situation that could be fatal, right?
Mm,
And over time, situation that we face and how we can apply it, the life threatening aspect of it has watered down because of
mm,
advancements in technology and things. There are not many threats to our survival, but there are situations where we apply it based on our immediate knowledge of, like, using system one and system two, like, of thinking, in psychology. We can kind of apply that by immediately thinking on the spot about what we're going to do next and what our
yeah.
next
Could I
action.
elaborate on what you just
Yes.
said? So, Aryan said something pretty cool about something called System 1 and System 2 thinking in psychology, right? So, System 1 thinking is like a rather fast and intuitive form of thinking, which generally leads to, I wouldn't say rasher decisions, but, like, of course, faster decisions when it's needed. For example, if something like driving a car has become second nature to you, right? You would think about decisions involving driving a car using system one thinking versus system two thinking, which is slower, but it is to break down more complicated information and to learn something in the first place, right? So learning the car in the first place would require system two thinking, right? So I
Yeah.
think when you talk about that, and if we apply the fight or flight response to the exact same scenario of system one and system two thinking while driving a car, I think for someone who is using system two thinking and to whom driving is not second nature and it's not very easy, right? I think they would, in the situation of a car speeding towards them, they would choose to flee the situation, which would be the flight response, right? They would choose to flee the situation for their safety, uh, versus someone who is very comfortable with driving, right? They would, of course, they would still flee the situation. They wouldn't fight and crash a car, but
Yeah.
they would
Yeah.
have a more, I guess, a more aggressive response. Although aggressive doesn't have to mean violent or uh, like
It's more on
causing
the spot.
or yeah, a more on the spot and I guess a quicker response, which would again it would include fleeing the situation by escaping a car crash, but it would just be different simply because it's system one thinking, right? So I think fight or flight responses also changed a lot in modern context besides for just driving a car. Even in now we see I just thought of this that we've all heard the quote, right? The pen is mightier than the sword, and I mean
Yeah.
centuries ago the sword actually had its power, but today uh, I think words are so much more important and powerful, right? So in that
Yeah.
way, yeah,
And they trigger the same thing, which is that stress
exactly.
or
So if we talk about in a debate, right, in a heated debate, there's one person who's the aggressor in the debate, right? So this is talking about the fight or flight response in the modern context. So uh, in a heated debate where someone is absolutely roasting the other person, the person who is trying to defend themselves, if they themselves are okay, not in this case, not really physically capable, but mentally capable of coming back with a rebuttal where they can defend their own perspective, right? That would be a fight response versus if
yeah.
they don't have a response, then they would just say, sorry, you're right, and they would leave the situation, right? So I think that's a modern application in like a context which we've seen multiple times, right? So,
Yeah. And as Sona was explaining it, you can kind of see the parallel that we're drawing between two times that were very different. Although the situations were completely different, it's always the same aspect that triggers this
mm,
flight or fight response. And it's that stress, it's that difficulty and of situations that has kind of adapted to what are like new trends are in society and things like that. So when you're faced with something frightening today, there are many instincts that come out, on a physiological level, such
mm,
as things like your heartbeat starts pacing quickly, it starts quickening, or things like you start breathing faster, you start sweating more, your entire body is tense and it's ready to take action. That's a form of fight before the action takes place,
mm,
which is something that we're going to talk about more because it's so interesting that in a situation that's given to you, I want to give an example, okay? Long ago, there's an adaptive instinct that cavemen developed, and it's when, weather was harsh and they didn't have the resources like blankets and things that we have now to keep ourselves warm. And their response to that situation was goosebumps. It's such a weird
and
concept, but
shivering, right?
shivering and goosebumps, like
Yeah.
we do it on a daily basis, but we don't understand why we do it because it's such an odd thing where we don't have we don't need it. Actually, it's not something that we need because we've gone past that stage in our lives in the modern day. But back then when they had thick hair, the way to kind of protect themselves or shield themselves from like the cold weathers, the harsh winters and things like that was to let their like hair out, and through
Mm,
goosebumps they kind of protected themselves, and that's a response that kind of was led by a situation that triggered them and something that caused them stress or threatened them. And you know, that's something that I want to talk about. So now you want to talk about something that you want to talk about this, about how, like, before you take the action, um you trigger a fight or flight response,
Y- Yeah,
on a physical level.
I think one more thing which I want to talk about before I come to that is
Yeah,
how, like, again, coming back to the point about how the times have changed, right? If imagine you told your ancestors who were fighting like each other with swords or fighting people with swords that
yeah,
in that today my fight or flight response gets triggered, like the same response that you have when you're fighting in battle, my response gets triggered by someone insulting me in a debate, right? They would laugh at you. But I mean, it is like how we have evolved in this context, right? And I think that's so interesting because uh,
yeah,
like you wouldn't think of like any basic response uh, as what the response is, like what it's triggered by, right? You would think of just the
yeah,
response to be what it is. And now coming to what you said, right? So uh, even if we take an example of a basic example of a human response, such as homeostasis, right? And coming
right,
back to the example of shivering and goosebumps, right? We feel cold or yeah, if we feel cold, goosebumps appear and we start to feel warm again. And if we feel too warm, then we sweat, right? And
yeah,
that's a basic response which our human body has like continuously adapted to. And I think because like homeostasis is such a response where we can maintain our body at a comfortable degree. It again comes back to the idea that it's made for survival, right? And it's made for uh, our body to know that like we're still safe because of its responses.
right.
So one
Yeah,
more thing which I want to, I guess, connect it to now is because um, our body is so versatile and so it has so much potential to do so many things, right? Like we can run, we can jump, we can read, we can do so much, right? But
yeah,
when we exert our body to a degree where it actually inflicts damage on our body itself, for example, a fracture, right? Uh,
yeah,
I think in a previous episode, I spoke about how I got a fracture, right? Obviously, I've experienced so much like physical pain because of that fracture. Like when my foot literally the bone in the ankle bone cracked, right? I experienced pain because my brain would have released a hormone which induces or makes us feel pain, and the reason
yeah,
for that isn't so that we actually feel pain. Like our body doesn't want us to feel pain, right? But it induces that hormone so that we don't push ourselves further and it kind of restricts us, right? So I want to think of it using this analogy that let's say our body has a pivot and it has a string, okay? And the string is something that revolves around the pivot, but it's obviously connected to the pivot. And let's say if we push our cells too far, and in this case the string is stretched too far, it'll just snap back and go back to its basic state of not being able to do much due to the pain caused or felt actually, right? So, because if you think of it, like we don't actually feel pain unless our brain releases that hormone which
by
causes us to feel
hardwired.
pain, right? So, I think that's another response which is pretty cool because if anyone had a fracture, they didn't feel pain, they continued to overwork their body, their leg or their bone would soon become ineffective in performing its function of movement, right? And I think that's
Yeah,
just a pretty cool thing.
you know what? So I haven't had a fracture yet, thank
Mm,
God, touch wood.
yeah.
But I had experienced something similar with the stitches I've gotten on my shin.
Mm,
And it's like I fell into a gutter. It's a long story, but basically, I it's very interesting. It sparks like what you said sparked something. Um, I felt the same way um, of how you described it. I mean, obviously, all of you guys don't want to get hurt again, right? Because you hate that feeling of, getting. I don't know. Some of you might be weird, but you hate the feeling of getting hurt, and that's actually a response. That it keeps coming back to you as something a negative response that you don't want to repeat again, and
Mm,
the body's kind of warning you that this shouldn't be repeated, so you kind of stay away from doing it again.
exactly.
And you know what, you brought up something about hormones,
Mm,
and there's not only negative, there's also positive ways you could apply this. When the big like when you first process that situation, the amygdala reacts to that threat, and your entire nervous system reacts to the adrenaline of the whole situation.
yeah.
And talking about adrenaline, when you're playing a game, right? So now you did a whole study, and you did a lot of research on dopamine, right?
Mm,
When you play a game and you win, or do something that triggers a response of feeling rewarded,
mm,
you want to feel that again, right? And that's what
exactly.
causes addiction. You can talk more about that, but this is an example of how it can positively make you want to do another action. And it's kind of like you're fighting the same situation, but your body is not running away from it this time. It's something that you feel inclined to doing again.
Yeah.
And it's like, so you want to talk a little bit more on dopamine?
Yeah. And I want to talk about how, firstly, dopamine or uh, yeah, firstly, dopamine and how it again ages back to the times where our ancestors also had to survive, right? So, if we talk about dopamine, it's essentially the chemical of reward and of motivation. And basically, this there's something called the reward cycle in the brain, right? Which, let's take an example of a video game, as you said. It There's a sense of achievement, right, with winning the game, and
Right.
your brain tells you after you achieve something that good job, you've done it, and now this is in your reach, right? Like say an award or a reward is in your reach, which basically motivates you to do the same thing again. Now, if we talk about the context of, or let's also apply this the reward cycle to having a chocolate, to eating a piece of chocolate, right? If we eat a piece of chocolate, it feels or it tastes so good, and a lot of dopamine is released because the reward that we get from that is something that's like I'd say a residue from evolutionary uh, processes, right? Because if you think of it, eating a piece of chocolate isn't actually gonna change your chances of survival, at least not in today's date, in a very comfortable environment, right? If I'm
Yeah.
sitting here, I'm eating easily 2,000 calories a day, which is
Yeah.
extremely healthy for like anyone like me or anyone. Yeah, so I think just eating an extra piece of chocolate isn't going to change your chances of survival drastically, or probably it's negligible. But I think why that still applies, or why it still feels so good to eat chocolate, because of dopamine in the reward cycle, which dates back to say when cavemen uh, ate or hunted animals and then ate a piece of their meat, right? What would happen is that would indicate to their brain that they have just satiated their body with enough food to survive for the day, and it's a reward, right, for the body to
Yeah.
survive, literally. So coming back to the point, it's all about survival. So if we fed our brain, if we fed our body, sorry, with meat back
Yeah.
then, it would, I guess. indicate to the body that you've eaten enough and you've eaten, but you need to do this again. That's why it gives you the motivation to do it again the next day. And I think this is all again coming back to the point about survival, right? And how like everything links back to it.
Yeah, and
You want to?
yeah, so I'd like to go off on a tangent here, but
Mm,
we're talking about games, and the thing that really makes games satisfying is the process that you go through. When a game is easy, it's kind of boring, right?
mm,
You don't feel like you've won anything. There's no reward aspect to it because it's so easy to reach that final level or whatever you're planning to go for, no pun intended. But basically, our this entire fight or flight thing is based on cortisol, which is referred to as a stress hormone.
mm.
And that kind of it's a hormone that kind of increases your alertness and immunity and helps in situations that you may feel it's like threatening at in some situations. And for games, it's not your own life, but you're kind of going through a
Yeah, it's your
like
character's life, right?
it's your
Like you're
character's
controlling a
life.
character. Yeah,
Yeah, and it's the difficulty of the game that eventually, if you overcome that difficulty, you will start to feel adrenaline. Yeah, so adrenaline comes from the adrenal glands, and basically it what adrenaline does is it increases your heart and respiration rates. And when it comes to video games, you're so engrossed that that whole feeling, that process of going through that difficulty in a game
yeah,
kind of increases, or like is directly proportionate to the amount of adrenaline that you're excreting. And in this case, as you keep you keep increasing the difficulty, the level of dopamine that you get from winning or overcoming that challenge increases, and you become addicted to that response of like
yeah,
you won that game because it was so hard, and you tell your friends, wow, I beat this level and you guys didn't. And that's a rewarding aspect of it, and kind of gets you addicted. So that whole aspect of how cortisol can be like back then stress was like when like a bear or something was chasing you, you'd go under a lot of stress. And today when you're getting killed by a friend in a video game, you're like, oh god, you go through the same amount of
yeah.
stress. And that's that's basically what this whole fight or flight response is based on.
Mm,
And Sunav and I were like long time ago, you were on call, and we were talking about school challenges and issues and everything that was going on in our lives. And I remember Sunav brought up this point. He's like, everything that you do, no matter where you are, is based on survival. And I said,
yeah,
I was confused because he just randomly brought it up and I didn't understand what he was saying. And he's like, give me a situation, any situation, and I'll explain to you how it's survival. So now I like to put you on the spot here,
mm,
and
yeah.
I'll give you a situation. Okay.
Okay. This was not planned, by the way. Let's okay. Let's see.
Yeah. Okay. Let's say you have nothing on you but your backpack. Okay. And you're walking down a narrow street and you see a dog barking at you in the distance, and it's chasing
Hmm.
you, right? You don't have the inventory or anything to, you don't know what's going to happen. How would you apply survival to this
Okay.
situation?
So I'm gonna assume this in a modern context, like me as in me, right? And let's say I have never fought a dog before, so I don't know how well I would fare against one, right? So I think what I think if I remember correctly, what I said in that context when we were on a call uh, was about the evolutionary aspect of it, right? And I think if I have to
Right.
connect it to this, I'd say that uh, someone who's not capable of fighting an animal, right? Now, let's say. let's put this as a parallel, this situation that you gave me and the situation of uh, my ancestor being chased by a lion, right? Who is chasing him for food, right? The same instinct is triggered, I believe, where probably both parties being chased are not capable of defending themselves, or even if they are doubtful of their abilities, right? And I'd say I would run. That's situation A, and that would be the flight response. Or situation B, according to my judgment, uh, I am strong enough to combat a dog chasing me, even if it's a stray dog, and I stay and I fight the dog for my survival, right? And I think this is actually an easy example which you gave me, because it's this literal parallel is drawn between uh, a caveman and a person today, and what this means to uh, what this means to me. So, to me, what I would feel is probably a lot of stress, first of all, because I don't know if
Yeah.
it's chasing me for a food item I have in my bag. I don't know if it's chasing me because it smelled something on me, which I guess it felt is suspicious, or I don't know, right? So, uh, I think there is an obvious survival response which our body creates, right? And I think before we, I guess, end the podcast, I have uh, one more point, which is now, Aryan, I'm gonna give you a situation, and let's see.
Okay.
Uh, I'm gonna give you a random situation, okay? And let's see if you can think of how that. Or how we use our survival or any response which is rooted in like evolutionary survival, right? So let's see. Uh, you are in a debate, okay, and I mentioned this earlier in the podcast, right? You're in a debate, and you are or a very controversial side of a debate. It's about the Russia and Ukraine situation. You are debating for Vladimir Putin and his actions, and someone is um, pulling out Article 14 of the UN Charter and telling you something that you do not know, right? And they tell you that you have violated Ukraine's sovereignty, and you feel as though you don't know what to do in the situation. How is this rooted in survival?
Okay. So you didn't go easy on me, but I'd like to bring in a point before I tell you how I can apply survival to this. The threats that we face to trigger this response could be divided into two parts. One is a physical threat and one is a psychological threat. A
Hmm.
physical threat could be like what I mentioned, a wild animal chasing you. And there were more physical threats back in when humanity started applying this fight flight response. But the psychological threat could be something like public speaking and social situations and phobias. And this situation that you presented me with is a psychological threat. Some When I don't have in my inventory, I don't have the resources to defend myself. I'm talking about, I'm not a munner like you, so I don't have the experience of debate. But um if I don't have the response to this article or whatever this person has put against me for my defense, like, for Putin, my initial reaction will always be flight. Because in this case, I would probably defend. I'll probably stay, like, go away from this point, because he's won against me. I have nothing to say.
Right.
um and I just accept the loss as what it is, because I have no point, and that's flight, right? Because you can't win that situation. You have nothing to back yourself up.
Hmm.
And a more aggressive response, if I did have something, or kind of wanted to have a rebuttal, I would say something more aggressive and apply a fight response,
Mm,
which kind of countered it. The same article on how, if we're talking about Ukraine, how like maybe it was caused by the US government, or some article that
yeah,
brought it up. If I had something, right? So it's all on the spot, and this psychological threat is, very common in people our age, because we face, public situations and phobias every single day. And it's that transition from physical threats to psychological threats, and that kind of, that we face on a daily basis, and how it evolved. So, to sum it all up, this
yeah.
situation, I hope I did justice to your
I think you did.
situation.
Yeah,
But to sum it all up, fight or flight has is an instinct. It's something that's a response that's been, it's a not, I wouldn't say calculated, but it's a response that's been, done over many years, through many different generations, and many situations, um, which may or may not be life threatening.
yeah,
And point to bring in is the fact of the stress, the cortisol, and how, no matter what the situation is, there's always the one aspect that triggers it is stress and the difficulty of the situation.
yeah,
And it's your system one thinking, it's how you react on the spot. And it can be applied to any situation, as Sunav and I just demonstrated. And it's based on, like when I said it was at a personal level, I meant the situation that you put yourself in. If you have, the resources to fight, your instinct would be to fight and to go against the situation presented against you. And if you don't have the resources, then your initial reaction would always be to run away, right?
yeah,
And so now, would you like to sum it up in your
yeah.
own
And I think
words?
to conclude, it's so mind blowing, and it's so
Yeah,
actually cool how like these traces of evolution are still in us, and how our entire body is literally designed for evolution, or sorry, for survival, right? And it's designed for the sole function, and there are so many complications on top of it, which is what we try to delve into in this podcast. And for that reason, I love these discussions. Thank you for watching another podcast. We'll see you in the next one.